History remembers propaganda as posters, slogans, and speeches. But the most powerful propaganda does something far more dangerous. It changes the way people see reality itself, and once that happens, millions of ordinary people can begin supporting things they once would have considered unthinkable. In the 1930s, Germany became the most advanced propaganda state the world had ever seen. Not because its people were uniquely evil, not because millions suddenly became monsters overnight, but because fear, humiliation, economic collapse, and constant psychological conditioning slowly reshaped how an entire nation thought. And the most disturbing part is this: much of it did not feel like manipulation. It felt like truth. To understand how propaganda transformed Germany, you first have to understand the country itself after World War I. Germany emerged from the war devastated. Its economy collapsed. Millions were unemployed. Political extremism spread through the streets. Violence between rival factions became common, and many Germans believed they had been humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. The country was unstable. Fear was everywhere, and fear changes the way people think. In moments of uncertainty, people begin searching for simple answers. Someone to blame, someone to follow, someone promising order. That emotional vulnerability created the perfect environment for propaganda. Because propaganda works best when people are already desperate for certainty. And Adolf Hitler understood that. He understood something terrifyingly modern. People are easier to control emotionally than logically. So instead of focusing only on facts, he focused on identity, emotion, fear, belonging, humiliation, and hope. Once the Nazis gained power, propaganda became industrialized. It spread through nearly every part of daily life: newspapers, radio, schools, film, posters, music, public rallies, even children's education. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, believed repetition was one of the most powerful weapons ever created. If people heard the same message constantly enough, eventually many would stop questioning it. The regime simplified complex problems into emotional narratives. Germany's suffering needed an explanation, and propaganda provided one. It blamed enemies, created scapegoats, divided society into us and them. At massive rallies, crowds stood beneath enormous banners while synchronized speeches, music, lighting, and symbols created overwhelming emotional experiences. The goal was not debate, it was immersion. People were not simply being informed, they were being psychologically surrounded, and over time, constant exposure began reshaping what felt normal. The most effective propaganda rarely begins with extreme ideas. It begins with emotional pressure, fear, isolation, humiliation, anger. Then it offers relief, certainty, belonging, identity, a simple explanation for complicated problems. Psychologically, repetition changes perception. The more often people encounter an idea, the more familiar it feels, and familiarity can slowly become acceptance, even when the idea itself is dangerous. Group identity also becomes powerful. When entire crowds repeat the same beliefs, individuals become less likely to challenge them. Humans are social creatures. We instinctively fear exclusion, and propaganda exploits that fear. Over time, language itself begins changing. Enemies become less human. Violence becomes framed as necessary. Cruelty becomes justified through moral language. And gradually, actions that once felt impossible begin feeling acceptable. Not because reality changed, but because perception did. As Nazi propaganda intensified, Germany transformed. Independent media disappeared. Opposition voices were silenced. Criticism became dangerous, and millions of people were exposed to the same emotional narratives every single day. The regime presented itself as the protector of national survival. Anyone opposing it could be portrayed as a threat to the nation, to stability, to the future. And once populations begin seeing political enemies as existential threats, extreme actions become easier to justify. That is one of the most dangerous psychological shifts in human history. The result was catastrophic. A modern industrial nation became capable of mass persecution, war, and genocide on a scale the world had never seen, not through mind control, but through years of emotional conditioning, fear, repetition, tribalism, and political manipulation. History often treats propaganda like a relic of the past. Old posters, black and white speeches, dictators yelling from balconies. But propaganda did not disappear. It evolved. Today, information moves faster than at any point in human history. Algorithms amplify outrage. Fear spreads instantly. Emotional narratives dominate attention. And millions of people consume information designed not necessarily to inform them, but to emotionally activate them. That does not mean every message is propaganda, but it does mean modern societies remain vulnerable to the same psychological forces that shaped the past. History likes to imagine propaganda as something obvious, something people should have recognized immediately, but propaganda rarely feels like manipulation while you are inside it. It feels like truth. It feels like certainty, belonging, security, purpose. And that is why propaganda has shaped human history so many times. Not because people are weak, but because human psychology is vulnerable. The terrifying lesson of history is not that propaganda once rewired an entire nation. It is that every society believes it could never happen again until history proves otherwise. Subscribe for the next story. The vault is open.